I think what we ought to talk about, though, is what's important about it. There's a couple things that are worth talking about to go on here, and one is that it was the outrage at the terrible press coverage of the invasion of Iraq that really fueled the modern media reform movement. If you remember, the invasion took place in March 2003. Well, in June 2003, the Federal Communications Commission was going to vote on rules that would radically loosen up media ownership. Let the same companies that lied us into that war buy up all the media in the country to make sure there would be no dissident voices. And en masse, the anti-war movement moved into media activism, saying this is absurd. We can't let the General Electrics, the Rupert Murdochs, gobble up all the media. We can't have one company own a daily newspaper, own 8 radio stations, 3 TV stations, and the cable system in a single community. We can't have company town media with one newsroom owned by Murdoch or General Electric serving an entire community. That's unacceptable. This movement rose like a phoenix in 2003 and has expanded since then. Now, what happened in 2003 wasn't an anomaly, though. It followed a pattern we know all too well over the last 100 years. In this country, presidents and governments have wanted to take us to war, going back to 1898, foreign wars. And in almost every single case, in fact, in every single case, the initial response of the American people was hostile to it. They didn't want to get killed fighting in a war that made no sense to them. And in every case since 1898, the media, the press, has played a central role. It's been the most important battlefield in many respects for the presidents, for the governments, to get people to buy into the war, to support it, to pay for it with their money and with their lives, and with the lives of countless millions of other people overseas. In almost every one of these cases, I say with no pleasure, the news media became a conduit for lies, half-truths, and propaganda. In 2003, the Iraq War was not the exception to the rule, it was the rule. But the problem goes deeper than that even. It goes more than 100 years back. In fact, I think the issue about the coverage of the Iraq War, the invasion, the occupation, the surge, right to this very day, the new debate going on in Washington, the problems with that go to the origins of this country. It goes to the origins of freedom of the press and why we have it. And I think that it's fitting here in the city of Madison that the founder who spent the most time thinking about freedom of the press was James Madison. And he was also the founder who spent the most time thinking about what it meant for a free society to also be an empire and the contradictions connected to that. Remember that Madison, like Jefferson and most of the other founders, was classically educated. He studied Greece, he studied Rome. He understood that the decline of Athenian democracy, the collapse of the Roman Republic, was due primarily to the emergence of militarism, foreign wars, and empire. That empire and democracy ultimately were incompatible. You couldn't have both simultaneously for any sustained period of time. Madison also knew, it didn't take a great genius to see this, but he was a genius nonetheless, that America was soon going to be the wealthiest or one of the wealthiest economic powers in the world. There would be tremendous pressure on American governments to flex their muscles militarily, to become a dominant global power like the British or the French or like the Romans had been. And he was obsessed about this as a problem for our country. He was obsessed about the fact that the threat, the rise of empire, the pressures internally to become a dominant imperial force in the world would undermine any capacity for self-government to survive and exist. And I'd like to read one quote from you, and I could have picked from 50, but one in particular that I think captures what Madison felt about this and how serious he took the issue of militarism, foreign war, and empire. So bear with me. Of all the enemies of true liberty, war is the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debt and taxes, and armies and debts. And taxes are the known instrument for bringing the many under the domination of the few. In war, too, the discretionary power of the executive is extended. Its influence in dealing out offices, honors, emoluments is multiplied. And all the means of seducing the minds are added to those of subduing the force of the people. The same malignant aspect in republicanism may be traced in the inequality of fortunes and the opportunities of fraud growing out of a state of war, and in the degeneracy of manner and of morals engendered in both. And here's the final line. No nation can preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. James Madison. Every single clause in that statement remains true today. It's an insight of unsurpassed genius. It was the press system, in Madison's view and in Jefferson's view, that was the public sentinel to keep rulers in line and to prevent the emergence of militarism in an American empire. Madison and Jefferson could not have been more clear about it. As Madison put it in 1822, a popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy or perhaps both. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. And this was the whole point of having free press, a freedom of the press, to give people the tools to govern themselves, and in particular, to prevent powerful central governments from taking this country to wars that would suit the interests of the wealthy, the powerful, and the corrupt, but not suit the interests of the American people. It's interesting that in all the great defenses of freedom of the press by the United States Supreme Court, this point is the one they always return to. In the great Pentagon paper case, the dominant opinion was exactly this, that the press system's primary role and its privileged role is because it alone has the ability to keep people on top of leaders for foreign wars, prevent militarism, and prevent empire. And it has to serve that role or the Republic cannot survive. Now, we learned one other lesson from Madison and from the founders, and this is something that's very important. They didn't think that something as important as a press system, as important as it was to make a republic, to make democracy possible, was something you rolled the dice of the free market on. You didn't just say, hey, rich guys, go see if you can make some money doing this, and I hope we get lucky and you generate good journalism. In fact, quite the opposite. The founders in that period, inspired by Madison and led by Madison and Jefferson, instituted massive printing and postal subsidies with the point of spawning a vibrant print culture, a literate society, and a vibrant journalism. The genius of these policies was they promoted a broad range of viewpoints. They strongly encouraged dissident publications that never could have existed without these subsidies, most importantly, the abolitionist movement. And it led this to be the most literate society and the most democratic society in the world in the first few generations of the Republic. Now, the media system we have today is profit-driven, we all know that, but it's not free market. It's not a free market system. Just like in the early Republic, our media system's the result of massive subsidies and monopoly franchises. But unlike in the early Republic, the policies today are drafted corruptly, behind closed doors. They're made in the public's name, but without the public's informed consent. And that very basic point is the starting off point for the entire media reform movement that has exploded in this country since 2003. Millions of people have come together to say these decisions, these policies that build this media system, these enormous subsidies we're giving to cable companies, phone companies, broadcasters, newspaper publishers, magazine publishers, these subsidies, these monopoly franchises that are made in our name, from now on they've got to be made with our informed consent. And what we've demonstrated in the last 4 years is when people organize on this issue, when they come together, we can win. It's really very simple. We rolled back the efforts in 2003 to relax the media ownership rules. We stopped them in the courts, and the court said, you didn't listen to the people of this country. You wanted to say something. You can't change those rules until you get the input of the American people as you're required to by law. We were able to stop government and corporate propaganda from masquerading as news, a widespread practice, an abominable practice. We won, we demanded, and we won that there be public hearings on all key media policy changes done by the FCC so the public can come in and speak in town meetings and let the people in the FCC hear from them, not just from corporate lobbyists. And most important, perhaps, in the last year, in the battle that's going on, is raging right now and be one of the dominant battles of the next 2 or 3 years, we stopped the telephone companies and the cable companies from privatizing the internet. When you go to something like Bobfest, you realize why the right to assemble was put in the First Amendment. It's one of our core rights. There's nothing like the power of people physically being together. I don't care how many emails you get from Move On. I don't care how many websites you go to. There's nothing like the power of 10,000 people coming together.